This Week in Gaming with Naomi Kyle.
Hi everyone, I'm Naomi Kyle and welcome back to This Week in Gaming. This week we're catching up on the future of Assassin's Creed, some Elden Ring news, your steaming pile of shame, I recap yesterday's Capcom showcase, and a prolific game designer admits to being bad at video games. We've got all of this week's gaming news, so let's get started. Capcom kicked off the month of July with their showcase event, Capcom Next. The showcase provided a look at just 3 games that Capcom has coming down the pipeline. A demo for the stylized tower defense title, Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess, was announced. The demo features crossover content with Okami-themed weapons and costumes for the game's protagonist, and the Maiden. Capcom promises that if enough people play the demo, that the items will permanently be available in the full game, which launches very soon on July 19th. Fans of the Resident Evil franchise were reminded that Resident Evil 7 launched on iOS and Mac on July 1st. The port features new auto-aim and auto-fire functions to assist with the struggles that may come with playing on mobile. Capcom also confirmed that a new Resident Evil is in the works. I saved the best announcement for last, of course. The original Dead Rising from 2006 is getting a remaster that launches, wait for it, on September 19th of this year. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster will include much-needed improvements like better UI, smarter NPCs, autosave functionality, and the ability to move while aiming. The future is now. After the craze that encompassed the whole month of June, Ubisoft conducted an internal interview with their CEO, Yves Guillemot, who offered insight into their present state of affairs and the future of Ubisoft and their games. During the interview, Mr. Guillemot was asked if fans can continue to expect smaller experiences like Assassin's Creed Mirage, alongside larger mainline games like Shadows, Valhalla, and Odyssey. He replied, "Players can be excited about some remakes, which will allow us to revisit some of the games we've created in the past and modernize them. There will be plenty of variety. The goal is to have Assassin's Creed games come out more regularly, but not for it to be the same experience every year. There are a lot of good games to come, including Assassin's Creed Hexe. Remakes of classic Assassin's Creed titles running on modern hardware would be great for gamers new to the Assassin's Creed franchise. Instantaneous load times combined with 4K graphics and ray tracing technology could mark these remakes as the definitive edition of their respective versions. One question remains though, which of the Assassin's Creed games is Ubisoft remaking? Could it be Assassin's Creed 1, 2, or 3? Maybe they'll make a remastered collection of all 3. Time will tell. Having remasters and new games on the horizon is all well and good, but the interview didn't end there. The interview and Mr. Guillemot discussed new game elements that Assassin's Creed Shadows brings to the series, and hopes for Ubisoft's X-Defiant to be seen as a serious esport. But what really caught my attention was what Mr. Guillemot said in parting, when asked, "What is it about the games industry right now that dismays you?" Guillemot responded, "What I am concerned about right now is the malicious and personal online attacks that have been directed at some of our team members and partners." He is, of course, referring to the online hate that has been directed at Ubisoft's employees developing Assassin's Creed Shadows. The outpouring of hate can be directly linked to people who are concerned that the games industry's focus on people of color, like the samurai Yasuke in Shadows, is a part of a larger ploy to make video games politically correct. Guillemot added, "I want to make it clear that we at Ubisoft condemn these hateful acts in the strongest possible terms, and I encourage the rest of the industry and players to denounce them. I am proud to support the amazing work of our teams and partners, and I will always trust in their creative choices. We should all celebrate the hard work and talent that goes into making video games." Mr. Guillemot is right. We need to focus more on celebrating what makes video games so great, and less on what we may dislike. How many games do you have in your Steam library for those who have one? 20? 40? 100 games? How many of those games have you actually played, and how many have just been sitting in your backlog? Journalist Ed Smith at PCGamesN.com set out to find the answer, and what he discovered is nothing short of astounding. Using the Steam ID Finder database, Ed found that 73 million Steam accounts have around $1.9 billion worth of unplayed games in their library. 73 million is a pretty big number, but it only makes up 10% of the accounts on Steam. So he believes that there could be a total of roughly $19 billion worth of untouched games. Ed has dubbed this phenomenon the pile of shame, Now, if you're curious to learn just how many games you have neglected in your Steam library yourself, head over to steamidfinder.com and gaze upon your steaming pile of shame. Elden Ring's DLC Shadow of the Erdtree has dominated the news this week. Since its launch, Shadow of the Erdtree has topped the charts across PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. It's been so successful, in fact, that in just 3 days, Shadow of the Erdtree sold over 5 million copies. And with 25 million copies of the base game sold across its lifetime, that equates to over 20% of players returning to the lands between. And you've got to be pretty hardcore to excitedly jump back in for more Elden Ring, especially after taking countless beatings from some of the hardest bosses in gaming history, like Melania, whose reputation spawned countless memes and even new lore between her and the famed Elden Ring gaming veteran, Let Me Solo Her. But as it turns out, even the most seasoned players have seriously struggled with the spike in the difficulty that is offered in Shadow of the Erdtree. The game's developer From Software responded to comments about the game's difficulty by suggesting via Twitter that players explore tips on how to improve player skills. As you can guess, being told to get good didn't make players very happy, so subsequently the DLC has been review bombed, resulting in a mixed rating on Steam. And in response to this, From Software released a patch for Shadow of the Erdtree, balancing the game and lowering the game's overall difficulty. Patches are to be expected shortly after a game's release to fix any bugs or issues that may have flown under the radar during the game's development. But the balancing portion of this patch can surely be attributed to the review bombing that took place. So what about the DLC needed balancing exactly? Well, in the patch note details, it lists an increased attack and damage negation of Erdtree, in short, allowing players to tank more damage from incoming attacks and deal more damage in return. And it isn't just players who have wrestled to surmount this most punishing of DLCs. Even From Software's president, Hidetaka Miyazaki, struggles with the game's difficulty. Now, you might expect someone as close to the game's design process as he is to be a highly skilled gamer, but as it turns out, Miyazaki sucks. Don't believe me? In an interview with The Guardian, Miyazaki-san said, "In preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games. So my approach or playstyle was to use everything I have at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also all the knowledge that I have as the architect of the game. The freedom and open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowered the barrier to entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else." It is fun to imagine Miyazaki, after countless deaths, attempting to beat a boss he helped create, then cursing himself under his breath for making the boss so difficult. So, the next time you find yourself at a boss that you just can't beat, don't be afraid to use spells, summons, or whatever else you have at your disposal. If it's good enough for Miyazaki, it's good enough for you too.
Games out this week.
Now let's go over the video games releasing this week. July 2nd, The First Ascendant tumbles onto PS4, PS5, PC, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. Dawn Trail, an expansion to the MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV, bursts onto PS4, PS5, Mac, PC, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. On July 4th, Zenless Zone Zero zips onto PS5, PC, and mobile. On July 5th, The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak leaps onto PS4, PS5, PC, and Nintendo Switch. No new additions to Xbox Game Pass this week. The Epic Game Store will be kicking off July 4th with another free game to snag. You can download a copy of The Falconeer from July 4th until July 11th. Amazon Prime is offering 3 games for free this week, starting July 3rd. Amazon Prime subscribers can download Wall World, Hitman Absolution, and Call of Juarez Bound and Blood. PS Plus subscribers can download Among Us, NHL 24, and Borderlands 3 for free, starting July 2nd.
Quest complete.
So that's the news for this week. It's now time to chat with our guest this week, Will Smith, who joins us to chat about Elden Ring's new DLC and why so many video games are left unplayed by the majority of gamers.
Select game mode. Multiplayer.
All right, Will, I'm excited to chat with you about today's news, but how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the show for the first time. Now, starting off again with a story that we did cover today on the show, but PCGN calculated that gamers on Steam, on average, spend $20 billion on games that they've never played. Why do you think people go and buy games that they've never played?
Well, I mean, the thing about Steam is there's often good deals, right? So you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, okay, I can't play this right now, but Fallout 4 is only $5. I'm going to pick that up, and then maybe one day I'll play the 200 hours of game that's there. And then you sit and look at it and you're like, oh, 200 hours of Fallout, that's a lot. I'm just going to go play this indie thing that I bought for $10 instead. And the pile keeps getting bigger and bigger. But, maybe one day I'll break my leg and I'll be locked up in the house for 6 months and I'll just, have to work through all these old RPGs that I haven't touched.
Right. I do feel like it's a price thing. I think Steam especially is notorious for having really good deals on games on average. PC games on average are much cheaper than console games and have more sales. So it makes sense that Steam would have such a huge list of games that just aren't being played, but that people have owned or bought. And I also think, the bundles that they do, like sometimes people are like, oh, this bundle's so cheap. It's cheaper than just buying the one game I want to play in that bundle, but all these other games I don't care about. But yeah, I think it's interesting. What else were you going to say?
I was going to say the other thing about this is that I think the bundle pricing is an important point, right? Because people like their price, they calculated this $20 billion that people spend on games that they've not played based on the full retail price of the game, and hardly anybody buys games on Steam on full retail price. Usually, most games do a sale every month or two, and then there's the big 4 or 5 annual sales that Steam does. So it's kind of like the thing that's unique for me about Steam versus all the other places I play games is I hardly ever play full price for games there.
And that's important. I think that's an important metric. So just keeping in mind that there's still a constant ongoing discussion. It's been ever since I started in the game industry, it's like my backlog. Everyone talks about their endless backlog. Do you think there's just too much content out there? Like, what is the reason behind having so many games that we know we're going to play and love, but never get around to playing?
Well, I mean, okay, so something like 14,000 games released on Steam last year, which is an incredible number. And yeah, it's a lot, but I also think it's okay to be a content tourist, right? I think it's okay to say, here's a game in a genre I've never played a tactical strategy game before, and I'm like, maybe I'd like to try one of those. And I play it for a couple hours. I'm like, it's not for me. I'm not gonna probably pick up any more of those. But it's worth trying those new things. And the beautiful thing about the diversity of games that are coming out now is that if you want a really hard, 90s style Japanese tactical strategy game, you can get that. That exists, right? If you want to play a really easy, just like a kind of interactive fiction game, those exist too. Like there's this enormous spectrum of games available, and it means that you can get exactly the thing that you want, no matter how kind of specific your tastes are, because somebody else likes that enough to make one.
And like you said, 14,000 games on Steam alone. So it's like there's no shortage of content out there. Moving on to another game that I did start but didn't finish, which I think a lot of people are in the same boat. But Elden Ring, their new DLC came out. I just want to touch on what is the thing, like what do people need to know about Souls-like games? Yeah,
so Souls-like games are hard fantasy RPGs generally. They have some sort of complicated and kind of punishing combat mechanics, usually involving like parries or blocks or riposts or hitting people with giant swords basically or magic, I guess. And typically they're designed to be played in kind of a brinksmanship way. So you have these bonfires that are your save spots, and then you push out from the bonfire, you explore this new area, and things don't respawn until you next sit at a bonfire. And the bonfire gives you health and restores all your health generation and all that stuff. Kind of gives you a reset. But then all the stuff that you've just killed spawns back behind you, so you're kind of at a new starting point. And they're known for being like the first ones were really, really incredibly difficult. I played all of them. I've finished 2 of the 10 or 15 or probably 20 now Souls-likes that are out there. And Elden Ring is actually one of the ones that I finished. It's one of the first Souls-likes that I got all the way through. But yeah, so Elden Ring is the open world. Traditionally, those were kind of linear, start at point A and go to point B and then go to point C and then go to point D. And Elden Ring is the first of those that's in a big open world, like an Assassin's Creed or a Far Cry or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting genre, and there's the whole aspect of it as well, where you're like collecting things, and if you die, you just lose those things unless you can go back and retrieve them. I've been playing Another Crab's Treasure, and I've been really enjoying that aspect of the game. But to get into the DLC, the whole controversy around the DLC that's been happening, I'm sure you've seen stories about it, but it's making waves because it's too hard to beat, according to folks, and even the developer himself. One of the heads fans of From Software. So what do you think is the thing that gravitates gamers to these types of games that are just so challenging and difficult to play?
Well, there's an interesting push-pull here, right? Because when the first Souls-like games landed, games were kind of perceived as being really easy, right? You sit down and everybody who finishes the game should be able to finish it, and everybody who starts the game should be able to finish it. And it was a moment where when this first hard games came back, people were like, oh, wow, I haven't played a game that was this hard since I played a game on my NES in the 80s, right? Like it was the difficulty was novel. And it's part of games expanding and games becoming more diverse is now people who want that extra level of challenge can find these games. Now, the controversy is that Souls-likes typically don't have difficulty levels. So when people complain about how hard they are, the typical gaming nerd answer is get good, and it's not particularly inclusive. It's not a great answer, but Elden Ring kind of works around that by giving you a large open world that you can go out and grind and level up your character and get more powerful. So if you can't beat a boss, you go out and play someplace else for a little while and you come back and you kind of cakewalk through it is the idea.
Having an easy mode. They've talked about this, having an easy mode for players who can't play at that level. Is that something that these games should even entertain, in your opinion?
I mean, I think this is one of those things that's always up to the game developer, right? Because at some point, you're talking about a team of people who are working on this thing for 2, 3, 4, 5 years in some cases, and they have a vision. And generally, it's easy to sit back in the morning and say, "Oh, okay, if I was making this, I would do this and this and this," and it's much harder to be in the weeds making a game and come to those same decisions, right? So my assumption is if people don't ship an easy mode, then they're making that game for a reason. They made that decision, and I trust them. And if I don't like them, there's 13,999 other games released on Steam this year, so I can go play something else instead.
Right, another Souls-like, or another Crab's Treasure, which I think is so sweet and fun, and is like a good, easy introduction to that genre for folks who maybe are intimidated by that, or just want to get the hang of it so they can eventually level up to those types of games.
It's the first of those that I've played that's not like a dark fantasy, grimdark, hey, everything's terrible world. It's really fun. Right. It's a lovely little game.
It's so lovely. So as a game developer yourself, we've seen this in the news a lot, review bombing. Hordes of players, they gather together and they have a thing that they'd like to change about a game. And I wonder what your opinion is as a game dev. Do you think review bombing is the right way to go about having their voices heard? Is that something that where do you land on them?
So it's complicated, right? Because I think it's important that people who play your games have a voice in the games that they're playing, especially for games like Helldivers or Elden Ring, things that have long lives, right? The one example that I came up recently is Arrowhead and PlayStation added some Sony login requirements to Helldivers, which came out in May or April, I guess, so earlier this year. They had originally released the game on Steam without these login requirements, and then they added the login requirements later, which prevented a bunch of people in countries that don't have Sony services online from playing this game that they'd bought on Steam. And that feels bad. There was a review bomb because of that. I think that is maybe the best example of a, hey, we're taking action and it's righteous and good. We've also seen people do review bombs because of things that are not good. People who don't like diversity in games or don't like certain aspects of a game, and they'll form a big review bomb, and it hurts. It hits developers in their pocketbook, right? Because the review scores directly impact how your game is promoted on Steam and other platforms. So like everything, it's complicated. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Yeah. I generally don't leave negative reviews on games. If I have a game that I like or don't like, just kind of bounced off on, I leave a positive review of games that I like, and I generally don't leave negative reviews. I'm
in the same boat as you for that. And I also think there's maybe just a different way to go about it. I mean, Twitter or social media, there's so many different routes. And a review score for a game can really affect a developer in the long term, and it's harder to change back. All right, let's get into some lighter news. What have you been playing? I know you talked to me about what you've been playing lately, but what has been your go-to game these days?
So the Ghost of Tsushima came out on Steam a couple weeks ago, And I picked it back up. I'd played it on the original PlayStation 4 release years ago, and absolutely loved it. But open world games sometimes are a little overwhelming for me, and I end up doing a bunch of side quests, and I'm like, I get distracted, and then I lose steam before I get to the end, and I never finish them. Speaking of piles of shame. So this time I picked it up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to play this. It's a samurai game. You play the last surviving samurai on an island in Japan after a Mongol invasion in medieval Japan, and it's just an absolutely lovely game, just stunning to look at. There's cherry blossoms flying everywhere around you all the time, and you get to live this samurai life in this big open world, this big sprawling open world, and it's been delightful getting back into it again. But I am doing the thing where I walk around and some peasant walks up to me and like, hey, my pigs got out. Can you help me find my pigs? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I got your pigs. We're going to take care of this.
You like helping people.
Like walking around with a giant sword and helping people out feels good. It's a good thing to do.
It does. Yeah, it does feel good. And it is a good thing to do. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Where can people find you? You've been in the industry for a long time, so people should know about you.
So I work on indie games mostly these days. I'm in between studios right now, as a lot of indie game developers are. But in the meantime, you can find me on every week. I do a technology podcast with my friend Brad Shoemaker from Nextlander and Giant Bomb over at techpod.content.town. It's called Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod, and we kind of break down a single topic in technology and explain it to in a way that normal people can understand. So it's a great place to learn what's going on, whether it's AI or Wi-Fi or we did an episode about my favorite mouse of all time a few weeks ago, which was great.
Ooh, which is?
The IntelliMouse Explorer. It was the first optical mouse, and it changed mice forever.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, guys, definitely tune into that. And, for easy to digest content, go to Will for Tech News. And then for me, come to my show for gaming. All right. Well, thank you so much, Will. It was so great having you.
Thanks, Naomi. It was great to be here.
Will Smith is a game developer and also a founder and host of Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. You can find him on Twitter at Will Smith.
Flawless victory! Continue!
And that's This Week in Gaming. I'm your host, Naomi Kyle. I had such a great time bringing you the latest in games. Thank you so much for listening. Your listen makes a huge difference. Don't forget to let me know what you're playing and what you think of these stories by tagging me at Naomi Kyle on social. From all of us here at This Week in Gaming, we wish you an awesome week, and we'll see you again, same place, next week. Thanks for listening.
This Week in Gaming is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the iHeartRadio app for more podcasts just like these.